Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast number 64. Coach Robb Beams, how are we doing on this beautiful Monday afternoon?
I am doing good, man. And I apologize having to bounce from Friday of last week, but thank you for carving me in. And I'm really looking forward to this subject. As usual, I know I say that at every show, but when I start putting some research together, I get excited about these things. And especially since a lot of the subjects that we speak about, I'm talking with clients for 30, 40 hours a week, and they're like, man, I didn't see it that way, or I didn't hear it that way. And I'm like, all right, if you didn't hear it, then our podcast listeners may have missed it as well. So I'm really excited about this subject today. It's good to see you.
Well, good to see you, buddy. Before we move on, I wanted to get some house cleaning taken care of first here. For one, I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners on YouTube. If you're listening to us on another podcast format, thank you so much for joining us every week. We greatly appreciate your support. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you guys like and subscribe. If you guys, which I'm sure you did, the last podcast that we did was kind of out of the blue. As you guys all know, Coach Robb ended up having a heart attack and scared the crap out of all of us. But Coach Robb is doing the Heart Walk for the American Heart Association on November 4th. And we are doing he's got a goal set out for himself to raise $5,000 for heart disease awareness. So Coach, I think last time we talked, we were kind of asking everybody for, if we can get $5 from 100 people, we would. Is that right? No.
Yeah, we were going to try to get it $5 out of 1,000 people.
1,000 people. That's
not
right. Hit
out of 1,000, but we'd like to hit a number of 5,000.
We want $5,000. We want $5,000.
That's right.
There was some issues, guys, when people went to donate. The minimum amount to donate was $25. So. We got a little special deal for you. So if you guys donate the $25 towards the American Heart Association, specifically for Coach Robb, and if there's a link in the bottom of the bio of the YouTube, you can click on the link. It'll take you directly there. If you donate the $25, we're going to give you $25 in credit for the Coach Robb cookbooks, which actually, Coach, will get them all the cookbooks?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a total of 4 or 5 cookbooks. I apologize because we're working on another one right now, so my number's a little distorted. I think the value is going to be around $45, $50 for the digital cookbooks for anybody that donates $25. Yes, sir.
Perfect. And that's awesome because, Coach, as you know, one of the biggest challenges that we all face is, like, you could tell us to do what workout and whatnot, and you could say, hey, go do push-ups or go do the bench press. Like, we get that, right? But when you tell us to eat well, that's a little tougher for us because eating well can mean so many different things. I've come to you, I don't know how many times, like, Coach, I don't know what to cook, like, what should I be making? So these cookbooks definitely will help somebody.
Absolutely. It's as we say in every one of our podcasts together, I mean, any product, any video that we've put out has simply been by the demand of our listeners. And when you guys are looking to go grocery shopping, a lot of people said, what should I do? So yes, we say in gist, shop the perimeter of the store. You'll get 95% of what you need. Then they're like, okay, I bought it. Now, how do I put it together? We wanted to reverse that. You want to make some chicken cordon bleu. You want to make, some burgers with a little bit of a twist to it. Here's the meal. Reverse engineer, because here's the list of ingredients. Then when you go to go grocery shopping, you've got your shopping list. So you know what to do from a shopping standpoint and then how to actually put it together, whether that be for smoothies, snacks, or for dinners. So you're right, Dan. We've put a lot of it, and they're fun. Like my wife is a gourmet chef, so she's got a lot of creative ideas. But as we travel the globe, we have recipes in there from people from Australia and New Zealand, and when we travel stateside and UK and everywhere else, because we like to try different things. So I'm not saying, by the way, we don't have like crazy stuff like, cow eyeballs and horse nostrils or something like that. But it is pretty creative, and there's a lot of different flavors that are in there. But as most people know, I'm not a big I'm not a big cook. I'm not a good cook, mainly because I just don't have the time or the patience. Michaela's got the patience of Job. So yes, that's where as the followers have asked and our clients have asked for years, hey, I want to get something that I can help absorb calories during the heat of summer. Hey, let's do some smoothies. So we put together a smoothie cookbook. Hey, what should I snack during the day at work, at the track, wherever I may be? So we put together uh, a snack book. I don't know what that'd be called. It's not a snack cookbook, but I guess a snack book idea. And then a couple,
a track snack pack
yeah,
list book.
there you go. Yeah, a snack pack book. And then, like we say, we try to come up with a lot of different ideas for dinner just so we can keep the blasé. But the cool part is you don't have to shop at a organic store. There's not exotic ingredients at all. So it is literally, it's made for the real people out there, not the ones that kind of tend to be a little extreme on either end. So keep it simple and sustainable, as we always say. KISS.
So donate $25. You get $45 to $50 of the
Yep.
value for the cookbooks. Okay, great.
Yep.
For the guys that want to donate a little bit more, if you donate $50 or more, you're going to get one of any digital bundle that you offer. And can you just give us some details on that?
Absolutely. We have some digital bundles out there. If you're into weight loss, we have a weight loss bundle. If you're into performance, we have a nutrition for performance bundle. If you want to, depending on what your sport is, whether you want to become a better swimmer or you want to use swimming as a cross-training tool, we have a complete swim bundle as well. These retail for $75. We will be happy to send those to you for your donation. And Dan, I want to make sure I'm not remiss on this. For all the people who have donated, and there's been a lot. I mean, I think we're around $600, $700 at the time of this recording, and I'm forever grateful. We've got a list, and we know what and how much was donated. You guys will be getting notification for this as well. So we can't thank our listeners enough, supporters. The idea that I thought I knew and I thought I was educated, and I guess I could use the word aware, and that's what we're trying to help the American Heart Association. It's the Greater American Heart Walk at UCF on November 4th. So everybody, thank you. Even if you can't donate financially, thoughts, prayers for people who may be in the hospital on struggle bus. We know that goes a long way as well. Maybe not as quantifiably easy to measure, but definitely it does make a difference. I can tell you that by from personal experience, excuse me.
Yeah, and if you guys reach out to me on Instagram at Dan Colvin 633, I told Coach Robb that I will match all the donations up to $1,000. So if you guys message me, let me know you donated. Let me know if you donated, $25 or whatever. I'll match you dollar for dollar up to $1,000. So I want to make sure, Coach, that we get you to your goal that you want to attain.
I appreciate it, buddy. And on behalf of all those who will maybe hear something that they didn't really think was a big difference, and if it saves their life, there's no way we can ever measure that either. But we have to trust that it will definitely make a difference. And as you know, I don't like to ask for money, but in this case, it's become a passion project for obvious reasons. So thank you for your generosity, and thank you for all those that have donated and are contemplating it in the future. Thank you very much.
You got it. All right, let's get into it, Coach.
Yes, sir.
Today's topic is the number one missing thing in your health and performance program that is holding you back. And it was kind of, when you sent me the notes, I wasn't really clear on what this was. But then when you said it, I'm like, you know what? You're right. And that's recovery. We 100%. Don't take enough time to recover. We don't do the proper things to recover. We make a lot of mistakes. We think we're recovering, but are we really?
Well, and for anybody who's followed us for any period of time, I don't want you to go, oh, we've talked about this before. Please, please, please don't rush off. The reason why I say that is when we look at the number one thing that can improve your health, if you're into any level of athletic performance, the number one thing that can help you get better is rest and recovery. Well, then we get into the convoluted question, well, how do we do it properly? So what I thought we would do, we'll see how much time we've got. We'll see how this conversation goes. I want to start tonight by looking at the 5 mistakes. Now, I'm not trying to be negative Nelly. I want people to understand, where did the mistakes hide? And they tend to be very, very subtle. And then time pending, or maybe we'll even break it into another podcast. What are the 5, not mistakes, But what are the 5 benefits? Most people go, oh, I'm going to feel rested. Oh, it goes way deeper than that. And it's going to be literally at the foundation of health and catapult all the way up to the performance level. So I know I say this at the beginning of each show, but I'm super excited about this because there's been some people that I've spoken to over the last 3-4 months, and they're like, I never really heard it that way, or you didn't put it in that perspective before. And I was like, you know what? There's definitely got to be some listeners out there that may have heard me for the last 35, 36 years, and maybe hasn't resonated with them. But I'm telling you, if you'll stick with us and you'll take copious notes, it's going to be an aha moment for you here in the next 30, 40 minutes.
One of the things for me, Coach, like when I think of recovery, right? And you know me, I'm a very driven person. I got 4,400 things going on at one time, multiple businesses, podcasts, my day job. I mean, it's right. I have so many things going on because I was always taught, got to make hay while the sun's shining, right?
Yep.
But I do that to a fault because I run myself into the ground, right? I just don't take the proper time, and I always have to remember one of those things, Coach, that we know we have to do, but we just don't execute it, and we kind of forget, right? Until we're to the point where we're sick.
Well,
And that's typically what happens to me is I end up getting sick.
absolutely, no pun intended. All the things that you mentioned, with the exception of your daughter and your beautiful bride, right? Everything else is work. Everything you're doing is work. And I have a cliche that I always say, mantra, whatever you want to call it. Please don't step over $1 to pick up a penny. Because if I was asking you, all right, look, you've got to give me a minimum of 23 hours a week before you're going to be healthy. You're like, yeah, good luck trying to find 23 hours. Sweat equity. There's just a lot that goes into give me 23 hours of exercise. But if I ask somebody to give me 8 hours of sleep, you see where, like you're saying, you're wide open, third gear, wide open. You'll step over $1 to pick up a penny because we'll justify not sleeping because we have a family, we have a job, we have all these other responsibilities. And then I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but what are you worth when you're constantly sick? What are you worth when you're 100 pounds overweight and you can't keep up with your daughter when she wants to go ride her motorcycle or her bicycle or her skateboard or wakeboard or surf or whatever the things that you guys like to do? Well, now you can't be your daughter's dad. You can't be your bride's husband. You can't. Now all of a sudden you realize, oh gosh, all that money I made is at the expense of my health. And that's why I want to talk about recovery as it relates to health, because no matter where you're at in the performance realm, everything catapults off of a baseline of health. Now, again, for some people, they may roll their eyes and go, that sounds pretty obvious. What you're about to hear in the next 30 minutes is probably not so obvious. Even if you've heard us before, my question to you, and Dan, we say this when we're off the record, we're going to talk about this first subject here, not eating enough. That's bullet point number 1. It's the first mistake associated with recovery. And some people will say, yep, I've heard Robb say that before. Cool. I'm glad you've listened. Thank you. My question is, since the last time you heard us until this podcast, how much concerted effort have you put into bridging your daily calorie needs? If that's been 3 months, 3 years, whatever the cadence may be, if you haven't nailed it, start tomorrow, please. Don't beat yourself up on what you haven't done, not in a hopeless romantic way, right? But if you're not, and this is where when we start to see our health erode, we go, well, what am I going to do to turn it around? This is where I'd say most people are easy to jump onto the fitness bandwagon when what I'm asking for is the antithesis. I just want you to sleep more. Do you see how this just stacks on? You're already dealing with financial stress of being married and have a little one and all that you do. Then you add on top of that the idea that you got to get your job done. And then you have to keep your partner and your family happy. And then you get into the athleticism. And instead of looking at the rest being the foundation for athleticism, we want to rush right into, I'm going to go to the gym and smash myself. Well,
I
you
have a question.
put all that together, you're not healthy. Go right
I have
ahead.
a question about that because this is what I did the last time that
Yeah.
that I was maybe 2 or 3 months ago when I started training again and getting back on the right track, right? Was what I did is because I was kind of feeling slow and sluggish and just tired, I felt tired all the time, right?
Yeah.
But I knew I needed to make a change, right? I need to start eating better. I need to clean up my diet again. I got to get to the gym. But what I did was, and it helped me, and let me know if I'm on the right track, if this is just me, or if it makes sense. But I actually took the week before I went to the gym and just started eating better. I started eating cleaner, just kind of dieting, getting back on, you know, what I know to do using the Coach Robb cookbooks, right?
Yeah.
And I instantly felt better because I was worried that the way that I felt at that time, just going back to the gym, I was going to feel worse because I was going to be like killing myself. I had no energy to start with because I wasn't eating the proper food or the quantity of food. And so I was already tired. So is that something that you would recommend? Because I did that this time and it worked for me.
Absolutely. Even if you're somebody who is not into anything motor related, you drive a car every day to work, right? You take a train, you take something mechanical. Isn't it interesting that we wouldn't think about driving, let's just say a month straight? I'm going to be very extreme here. You wouldn't think about driving a month straight and not having to refill your vehicle. You wouldn't think about driving a week straight without having to, give or take your typical mileage. But for the most part, and that's what I find so fascinating when we look at recovery. And this very first subject is most people don't eat enough. Now, we are going to make an assumption, and I know we shouldn't assume anything, but let's just assume that the quality is good. If you've listened to our show together, Dan, we're not a hellfire and brimstone guy, right? I'm not saying, as I always tease, I'm not asking you to eat tree bark and snails. What I'm saying is just stay away from fried foods. Stay away from as much processed foods as you can. That's why we always say if you just kind of stick to shop around the perimeter of the store and you're going to get 95% of the things that you need that are not going to be in a box, a bag, a wrapper, or a can. So you're 100% correct. But what I thought you said was pretty poignant. Quality and quantity. We're going to assume that you're eating out of the perimeter of the store. That takes care of itself. It's the quantity that people are dumbfounded by. And Dan, we've talked about this before, but since we're talking about the idea of recovery, and I don't want anybody to be confused. We're talking about being able, because you mentioned the energy word, energy. Again, this sounds so condescending. The only way you're going to have physical energy is if your body keeps being fueled. Now, we're not as absolute as a mechanical device when we see our gas gauge go to empty, and then eventually the motor does not have any fuel. We're not as absolute as that because we do have coping mechanisms that we've been designed with that allows us to continue on. As I've said to you before publicly, it's probably the bane of our existence because if it was as absolute as mechanical, who knows they've got to drive 10 hours and starts that 10-hour drive with a quarter of a tank of gas and isn't worried about running out of fuel. But yet we'll go through a 20-hour day, we'll go through a 15-hour day, we'll go through a 12-hour day. And we kind of think about food when it becomes too late, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. So come back to what you just said. If the quantity isn't sufficient, notice how you said energy starts to wane. And that's when we realize, okay, I'm starting to run out of go-go juice. So what do? We hit a stimulant, caffeine. So unfortunately, the body will respond to that, especially if you're not a big caffeine drinker. So your body gets revved up. It's getting an artificial stimulant, which unfortunately, if you can think about it mechanically behind the scenes, you've already got a tired motor and you just took on 5,000 pounds of load in the form of a trailer. It'll keep pulling until it can't. And I want to bring it full circle. Okay, Robb, bullet point number 1, the hidden mistake associated with recovery under the mistake category is not eating enough quality and quantity of food. All right, Robb, get the point. How much? Take your body weight, add a 0 to it. So if you weigh 150 pounds, you need at least 1,500 calories to stay awake. Notice I said awake because we'll stay alive. That's not a problem. But what happens is when our body is getting an insufficient amount of calories, the metabolism will actually slow down to match the calorie intake. This is a kind of a behind the scenes physiological fact. This is why the weight loss industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. If I get you to go from 3,000 calories down to 2,000 calories, behind the scenes, your metabolism will slow down to match 2,000 calories. You get busy. You say, you know what? I'm tired of having headaches. I'm tired of not sleeping well. By the way, that's because of a calorie gap. So now what happens is you go back to eating 3,000 calories. Well, your metabolism is slowed down to match 2,000 calorie intake. Now you've got a surplus of 1,000 calories. You see where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when the body has slowed down, it's called preservation mode, essentially thinks it's starving on an island. Now you eat that extra 1,000 calories. Your body will convert those extra 1,000 calories to stored body fat. If you have a piece of paper, write this down. And Dan, I need you to make sure that the listeners get this. When you go back to 8th grade, and we used to use Bunsen burners, and we would measure the amount of energy that was released when you burnt something, and you measured that. When your body takes a gram of stored body fat and it converts it to energy, it yields 9 calories of energy. So put it in miles per hour. If you burn 1 gram of fat, you get 9 miles out of that gram of fat. Think about that. If your body converts a gram of sugar, it only gets 4 miles to that gram. So literally, fat will give you twice as much energy for the same gram compared to sugar. That's where you hear sugar has 4 calories, fat has 9. So just think about it from an energy expenditure. When I spend it, I get to go 9 miles down the road instead of 4. Well, you put your body into preservation mode. It says, look, we're starving. We need to survive. So it packs those extra 1,000 calories into fat. That's called the yo-yo diet. You go on a diet at 200, you go down to 195. You say, screw this. I'm tired of having headaches and not sleeping. You add those 1,000 calories back, then you shoot to 205 or 210. You go, shoot, I got to go back on a diet. You go down to 200. You get tired of headaches and not sleeping well. You shoot to 225 or 230. And the weight loss industry goes, cha-ching, thank you, cha-ching, thank you, ching-ching. What you want to do, and this is where we get into the argument all the time, right? The dangerous side of inadequate calorie intake is increased body weight, particularly body fat. But the industry doesn't want you to know that, because what happens is, if you look at a lot of the no fat, low fat diets, what they're doing is they're just trying to dehydrate you. We've talked extensively about it, and that's not what we're talking about here tonight. What we're talking about tonight is recovery, right? The number one thing that people miss. Well, how can you expect the body to recover if you don't take in enough calories? Because, and we've talked about this before, when you go and you get your blood drawn and you get that profile, what is that giving you? What is the saturation point of all these micronutrients and macronutrients in your body? Well, where do those micro and macronutrients come from? The foods that you digest and absorb. So when you get your blood work and it's out of alignment, and yet people are continuing to tell you to strip food groups out because it's got sugar in it, please don't do that. It's the nutrients that we need out of it, because what are we talking about tonight? Recovery. Think about this. If you know anybody who has a thyroid issue, either overactive or underactive, what is it that they're going to tell you have an imbalance with? Iodine. Now, when was the last time, Dan, and for all the listeners, when was the last time you seriously gave some thought to what your iodine levels are in your bloodstream? But yet, if you know somebody who's got a hyper or a hypothyroid issue, their doctor is going to tell them they have to balance their iodine. So can any of the listeners, just off the top of their head, give you some list of things where iodine comes from? No, but they can tell you some dysfunctions associated with a hyper or an underactive thyroid. You see why I get so frustrated when people say strip a food group out? When they say, if you want to cut body fat, what you want to do is you want to cut calories. You absolutely do not want to cut calories. What you want to make sure that you're doing at all times is you want to make sure that as you're striving to lose body fat, notice we didn't say body weight. When you're striving to drop body fat, what is it you want to stay focused with? Let your physical exercise be at a lower intensity so you leverage stored body fat for fuel. Do you see how we came full circle? Fuel, how much? Quality, we already know is good. Fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. You're already an expert on nutrition. When we look at the quantity, take your body weight, add a 0. That's what you need to stay alive. We need to factor in what you're doing exercise-wise over and above that. If you want to lose body fat, when you exercise, keep the heart rate low. You'll leverage more stored body fat and less stored sugar. And ironically, here we are talking about recovery tonight. The body will never, ever recover on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual basis unless it gets enough calories. So that's why I refer to it as a calorie gap. Now,
I have to derail you too, because I have a question.
Yeah, go right ahead, brother.
relating to eating.
Yep.
Is you hear all these things right now about fasting, like
Mhm.
doing these 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour fasts or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because essentially you could potentially, I mean, you're missing a meal, so I suppose you can make up calories during the day, but can you give me some insight on why this fasting is good,
Well,
or is it good?
it's interesting because it's like everything that's out there. It starts out with some relatively benign existence, and then it gets taken out of context. And I'll give you a specific example. If it doesn't make sense, back me up. When I was an athlete at the Olympic Training Center, the subject of intermittent fasting came up. This is in 1991. The thing with intermittent fasting is they would only let us do it 1 to 2 times a week, and we were only allowed to do it during preseason. The focus on preseason is to maximize strength, maximize aerobic capacity, improve strength to weight ratios, try to drive your VO2 max up. The big thing that they say to us at the Olympic Training Center is we will not allow you to do an intermittent fasted bike ride, swim, or run unless we validate that your biofeedback indicators ironically tell you that you've recovered from what you did yesterday. Now, I need the listeners to understand that question was not teed up by Dan. We're just sitting here having a general conversation in a podcast format. When you take intermittent fasting, there are a tremendous amount of biochemical changes that happen in the body. And for the most part, they're relatively healthy. We refer to that as resetting the fat point. You start to leverage all kinds of, you get a lot of chemical changes inside the body. There is a point of diminishing returns as everything. And this is where I always ask people to back the train up. I want to answer your question specifically. Are there benefits? Absolutely. But before you go and you put your body through 12 or 18 or 24 or 36 hours or longer for some people, before you put your body through that, ask yourself, are you rested enough to be able to take on that additional stress? Because you hit the nail on the head. You start removing food, that's stress. Now, there'll be some people that will go, Rob, you don't understand. Digestion is stressful on the body. I call utter bullshit. Because to me, what you're doing is you're taking something into an extreme conversation. And let me give you an example. There's all kinds of studies out there that show that the body gets put under a lot of duress when it starts to digest food. I will give that credit. But where it gets taken out of context is what kind of food are you having the individual eat that you're evaluating stress? Dan, you remember in some of our previous podcasts together, I talked about the food may pass the textbook test, but it doesn't pass your personal litmus test.
Mhm.
So you'll get somebody, and unfortunately, it's not usually clinical physiologists, nutritionalists, some true clinicians that are saying, okay, if you eat the wrong foods, digestion is hard on the body. I will grant you a yes on that. But to say that because the body has to release insulin associated with the glycemic index of the food you're eating, and that it's hard on the body, and therefore you should sporadically eat is utter ridiculous. Because what you're asking the body to do is constantly go into preservation mode and survival mode. Yes. Will the body adapt to it? Yes. Is that a state of ketosis? Yes, when done to a certain extent. But you're going to be hard pressed to tell me that doing that on an ongoing basis is going to be healthy. Because if you want to argue that, I wanted you to take it out of human terms, put it in mechanical terms, and say, okay, I've got a brand new vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and run the oil at half of the suggestion. I'm going to see my engine gauge is going to be running hot. I'm going to notice it doesn't have a lot of raw power. I'm going to recognize that I'm excessively stressing a brand new vehicle. But as a byproduct of that, I'm just going to dismiss it and say, well, I'm just going to try to, with my brain and with my mouth, I'm going to override the principles of physics associated with mechanics. Because that's what you're telling me you're doing to the human body. Will it adapt? 100%. Will there be biochemical changes in the body? Absolutely. Are they all going to be healthy for the long term? Absolutely not. Because if I take somebody who's overtired, underfed, extremely exhausted, adrenal fatigue, all these negatives stacked up, and then you go ahead and add the stress of intermittent fasting, that's a fast track to disaster. So again, Dan, I know it's a long answer to your short question. It's just things have gotten taken out of context. The best thing I can say is if you stay to the principles of nutrition, fruits, vegetables, lean protein, and you stick to that fine balance between how much of your exercise is aerobic and anaerobic, it really all has to be previewed with how fresh are you? Ironically, we're talking about recovery again tonight. How fresh are you coming into today to work out? How fresh are you coming into dealing with your child? How fresh are you coming into going on a date night with your partner? How fresh are you to go to the office tomorrow and deal with a rogue boss? Or if you own your own business, your rogue employees, right? There's two sides to every equation. So that's where I have such a problem with it. Did we as athletes at the Olympic Trainer do what at that point they used to call them glycogen depleted workouts? So we would go to bed, we'd wake up, and we would go do a very low intensity, usually 60 minutes to 2 hours of low intensity training. And yes, you're teaching your body to leverage stored body fat as a fuel source. As soon as you add a smidgen of sugar, you immediately turn on the carbohydrate furnace. That's another subject for another day. That's some deep blood chemistry. But I wanted to answer your question. Have we done it? Yes. Does it work? Yes. But unfortunately, I would say conservatively, 98% of the people out there doing it today are causing more harm than they are good. I don't care who's selling what books and who's on what podcast. I see, unfortunately, we in our business, we see the negative fallout when somebody does that. How do I know? Because we ask them, what got you here? Oh, I've been doing high intensity interval training. I've been eating 800 calories a day. I've been doing intermittent fasting 5 times a week. And well, here you are. What do we find out? Your adrenals are smoked. It's like arguing with somebody who builds motors and then telling them you're not going to put radiator fluid in, no oil in, less than good race gas, and then be mad that the motor doesn't perform well. It's amazing to me. So I know it was a long answer to your short question, but I'm sure there's listeners out there that have had the same questions and may even are doing intermittent fasting and shouldn't be.
Well, that's what happens, Coach. We get on these topics, and I have more questions. So
Absolutely, but so do the listeners, and that's where the questions come in. If you follow me, here on YouTube, that's why I put a video out every day. These questions come in, and I love them. That's why we want to do this. It's the People's Podcast, and somebody will email me with a little bit more of a personal situation, and we'll convert it into a video for you guys. 100% for sure every time.
We're running low on time, Coach.
Yes, sir.
We have 4 more bullet points to get through.
Yeah.
Should we get through them fairly quick?
Yeah. Because I know our listeners, they do a good job of taking notes. I want to stay focused. Remember, what we're talking about here on today's show is the 5 mistakes associated with recovery. And I don't ever want to be negative Nelly, but it seems like when you use a negative situation, most people can resonate with it. Obviously, our goal is to turn them into a positive, which, by the way, in our next show, when we talk about the benefits of recovery, you're going to find that they're not obvious. If you Google them, you're not even going to find these 5 solutions and benefits associated with recovery. If you're taking notes here on the mistakes, number 1 is food not enough. And remember, you have to factor in what you need to stay alive plus your activity. Number 2 is not getting enough sleep. And I always want to use the QQ coefficient, quality and quantity. We're looking for 8 hours plus, and we're looking at that ratio of how much deep sleep are you getting against how much time you are awake. Now, we could do an entire show talking about circadian rhythm, sleep cycles, sleep patterns. It's not what I'm interested in. We're talking about tonight on recovery. Mistake associated with not recovering sufficiently is, and you notice bullet point number 1 is not eating enough, because eating satisfies hunger, which then improves sleep quality. So if you're not eating enough, number 2, you're probably not sleeping enough on the quality and the quantity side. Number 3, and Dan, you can relate to this because you just mentioned it a few minutes ago, is looking at too much stress. And this is where I want our listeners to go back to those 4 quadrants of life. How much stress are you dealing with personally, professionally, financially, and athletically? I think the first 3 take care of themselves, right? Personally, you've got a child, you've got your partner. It's very, very important to you. In fact, it's the most important thing to you. Well, there's a lot of work that goes into it. As you and I tease off the air, a relationship is not 50-50. It's 100%, 100%. You've got to be all in. When you look at financial, we all want to be ahead of the game, but unfortunately that drives us into the professional. Whether we work for somebody or we are our own boss, All of that has its own stresses. But what I want to focus on in tonight's conversation is that fourth variable, the athletic. This is where we really work with our clients closely. I can adjust the stress that you're going through athletically by adjusting the frequency. How often are you working out? The duration, how long you're working out, the intensity, the heart rate that you're training with. And what people have a tendency to forget about is what is the work to rest ratios? And we adjust that throughout the year. We adjust it for stimulation of the body to make it a little bit more difficult or give it a little bit more rest. But we also do it based on, for those that are athletic, preseason, pre-competitive, and competitive, the work rest ratios change throughout the year. That way we ensure that we're getting that incremental improvement. So look at your notes. You're not eating enough, you're not sleeping enough, and you simply have too much stress. Remember, when we look at the stress bucket on the one side of the teeter-totter, whatever the size of that you drew on the left side, the food and the sleep on the other, and isn't it ironic? Those are the first two things we're talking about tonight. The mistakes are you don't eat enough, and because you don't eat enough, you don't get good enough sleep quality. Now you're literally out of balance because the only two things that allows you to recover is food and sleep to offset stress. And Dan, you've had some career changes here in the last couple of years. Well, as you move into that new job, that's great. That box has gotten bigger. My question is, if you draw a regular size box or whatever regular is, right? Whatever you drew, you broke it into four 25% parts. Well, if your professional all of a sudden takes off, are you going to take it from the other three, or are you going to make the box bigger? You go, yeah, I get that. That makes sense visually. Well, then you better increase the size of the food and sleep box on the other side. Otherwise, you're out of balance and you're overstressed.
Yep.
That leads us to number 4, not training with focus. Okay. Not training with focus. This is where we go back to, are you training too hard? Are you training too easy? Well, the only way you can answer that is you got to look at the first 3. See, when we're looking at recovery, I'm talking about you recovering from life. That's why athletics is always the 4th one: personal, professional, financial, and athletic, because that's the only part of life that I can help you with. Now, when we look at that, not training with focus is you're tired, you're hungry, there's no way you could be focused. And then you run either into you're not training hard enough, you're training too hard, and or you're not absorbing the work that you are doing. And we see this as a byproduct of not training with the correct heart rate zones. And with our clients, we do a max heart rate assessment every 6 to 8 weeks. And we use a 4-week moving average on heart rate, resting heart rate. So what that ends up doing is it plays a significant role into what is the individual training for. And then we adjust that one variable I just mentioned to you. That's the work rest ratio. And then the 5th and the final is ignoring the symptoms before it's too late. Now, when I say ignoring, I want somebody who's taking notes to also put in parentheses, misunderstand. Because, hey, you don't know what you don't know. I went through a very ugly divorce. I learned a lot. I had been married for 25 years, never anticipated I'd go through a divorce. So I didn't become an expert in divorce, but I know a lot more now than I know then. Not proud of it, not happy with it. It is what it is, right? So when I say that you're ignoring the symptoms associated with fatigue, that's why we wanted to put these shows together, Dan, is so that we can educate our listeners on what to look for. Please jot these down. Number 1 is the symptoms associated with adrenal fatigue. Night sweats, write these down, please. Night sweats, craving simple sugars, low sex drive, tired and you can't go to sleep. Because when you have those, one or all of them, little or at high levels, that's the red light in the corner saying, hey guys, the adrenals are under attack. It's an external sign of an internal issue. Those are pretty obvious. But my point is, why wait until you're craving simple sugars and have night sweats before you go, you know what, I need to eat and sleep more and I need to get my stress under control. Hey, I want to become fit, but where's that fine line? Because the last 4 things I want you to write down under ignoring the symptoms: you lost your appetite. You've become irritable. You have GI distress. You're under a lot of, you notice that you're kind of full of anxiety. You find yourself kind of like a cat on a hot tin roof. And we've talked about this very serious word, depression, right? You find yourself just I'm not saying, again, if you're dealing with depression, please get professional help. That is not something that we take lightly. But again, when you have, Dan, you're a very upbeat person. If all of a sudden you found yourself being down, I'm not going to say that that's clinically depressed, but you would know that you're off center just a little bit.
Yep.
That's why I say, please don't ignore and or misunderstand the symptoms you're being given. Night sweats are not normal. Low sex drive is not normal. Craving simple sugars, night sweat, suppressed appetite, GI distress. You know your personality. If you're kind of off center, how many more blinking lights do you need that you're not recovering? So that's why I say these mistakes, they're things that we deal with, but what is the number one thing that we're all missing in our general health and wellness? We're not recovering. That's why I said to you at the beginning, Dan, please don't step over $1 to pick up a penny, because I'm not asking you to do more work. I'm asking you to kind of pump the brakes, pull the parachute, whatever example is going to help get the point across. And we'll get into because I don't ever want to leave on a negative note. We're going to wrap up this podcast here tonight. Please go through these notes. Start asking yourself, what can you do to turn these around? Next podcast we do, Dan, we'll walk through all the hidden benefits of recovery. And as I said a few minutes ago, they're not going to be obvious. And I guarantee you won't find them on Google because they're a little bit more subtle. But what I have found over the years is they're very, very effective. So we've looked at tonight, unfortunately, the negative side of it, still under the umbrella of recovery. But if you take each one of these 5 and you put them in a more of a positive light, which, by the way, it's not the positives, the hidden benefits that we'll talk about on our next podcast together.
But what's going to be cool about the next one is if the listeners take what we said tonight, right, and apply it.
Yeah.
When we do the next podcast, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense because I'm feeling this,
Exactly.
So I think that's what's going to be cool, right? They're going to be able to, we're going to kind of validate what the benefits of their recovery have been, and it's going to make much more sense to them.
Absolutely. And I just want to close by saying, if you've heard us talk about some of these subjects previously, just ask yourself, how much have you jumped on board with it and made a difference, not for me and Dan, but for yourselves since the last time you heard it? If you still haven't taken the jump and you started doing it, do it now. By the time we get to the next show, like you said, you'll have a little bit of momentum, which turns to a lot of momentum. So Dan, thank you for this show tonight.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for the shout out. Thank you for your generosity with the American Heart Walk. I really appreciate it. I want to thank all the listeners and subscribers. And as you always say, Dan, please spread the news. That's what we're here for. It's a people's podcast. Dan, thank you so much for your time, man. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
You got it. We'll see you guys next time.
Peace.